His hands were already on the tie before he had time to think about what he was doing. Khyven Rowe had been called in 40 minutes ago. Last-minute replacement. The original stylist, food poisoning, they said. Or something like it. Nobody gave him the full story. They never did. They handed him a bag, pointed at the hotel entrance, and told him to make it fast. He had done this before. Blend in. Finish the job. Get out. That was the whole system. Invisibility was not a personality trait for Khyven. It was a survival skill. A thing he had sharpened over years of working rooms where the wrong glance could end a career. Or worse. But the second his fingers touched the collar of the man standing in front of him, something locked in his chest. Not fear. Not attraction. Something older than both. Recognition. The kind that has no explanation. The kind that does not ask permission before it arrives. Nixer Valles did not move. Did not speak. Did not acknowledge that a stranger's hands were inches from his throat. His stillness was not calm, it was compression. Like something enormous being held back by sheer will. He stood the way people stood when they had spent years learning that movement was a language, and silence was a weapon. To Khyven's left, Soren watched. Not the room. Not the crowd. Khyven specifically. His eyes tracked without blinking, filing information the way accountants file receipts. Everything sorted, nothing wasted. To the right, Vale breathed differently. Shoulders loose. Jaw tight. The body of someone who had learned to look relaxed because tense people gave themselves away. His right hand never moved far from his side. 3 brothers. One silence that covered all of them like a second skin. Khyven finished tightening the knot. And that should have been the end of it. Should have been. But when he stepped back to check his work, his eyes caught the mirror on the black car parked at the curb behind them. Just a reflection. Just glass. Except the man in the reflection was not looking at the hotel. He was looking at Nixer, and his hand was moving beneath his jacket. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of slow that people use when they are trying not to be noticed, which is always the exact thing that gets them noticed. Khyven's stomach dropped. He was not security. He was not trained for this. His entire skill set involved fabric and fit and making powerful men look like they owned the world without trying. He was nobody here. He understood that completely. And yet his mouth moved before the rest of him caught up. He leaned forward, close to Nixer's ear, close enough to feel the man's stillness shift, just slightly, into something else. Don't get in the car. 3 words, barely a whisper. The kind of thing that should have dissolved into the noise of the lobby, the distant clatter of heels on marble, the murmur of a crowd that had no idea what was about to happen. Nixer did not react. He did not flinch. He did not turn his head. He did not reach for anything. He just stopped, like a clock pausing between ticks. And that was worse than any reaction Khyven had prepared for, because it meant Nixer had heard him, understood him, and was deciding what to do with the information without giving a single thing away. Soren shifted half a step to the left. Vale's hand moved. Hi viewers. Have you ever had a moment where you said something you could not take back, and the second it left your mouth, you knew it had already changed everything? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear it. The car door opened. The driver stepped out, and the world cracked open. The sound hit before the glass did. A sharp, flat crack that punched through the air and bounced off every surface at once. Then the car window exploded inward. Then the screaming started. Not a single voice, but a wave of them, rising all at once like a crowd that had just realized danger was not something happening to someone else. People ran. Security converged. The man in the mirror was gone. And Khyven stood exactly where he had been standing 2 seconds ago, tie still in hand, unable to make his legs cooperate, unable to process how 30 seconds of standing still had somehow made him the most exposed person in a luxury hotel entrance surrounded by men who could stop wars. Then Nixer's hand closed around his wrist. Not rough, not gentle either, just certain. The way you hold something you have decided belongs to you. You saw it first, Nixer said. Low. Even. Flat in a way that had nothing to do with calm. Khyven looked at him, and that was when it hit him. Not the danger of what had just happened, not the ringing in his ears from the gunshot, not the adrenaline working its way down his spine. The realization. He had just warned men who did not receive warnings. He had just inserted himself into a situation that operated entirely by rules he did not know. And he had been seen doing it. There was no version of this where he walked back to the agency, filed it away, and went home. That door had already closed. Nixer looked at him without blinking. You're coming with us. The silence in the car was a living thing. It pressed against Khyven's shoulders, filled the space between seats, sat in his throat like something he could not swallow. Outside, the city moved past the tinted windows. Lights streaking, traffic shifting, ordinary people doing ordinary things on an ordinary night that had no idea what was happening inside this vehicle. He had not been asked to get in. He had not agreed. But when Nixer moved, something in the air moved with him, and Khyven's legs had simply followed. The way you follow a current without realizing the water is already over your head. Soren sat across from him, watching, still doing that thing with his eyes. Cataloging, organizing, pulling meaning out of details most people never even registered. Vale sat beside Nixer with his arms loose at his sides and his jaw doing the thing it had been doing in the hotel. Tight, working through something. Nixer had not spoken since the entrance. That somehow was the worst part. Men who had things to say said them. Men who stayed quiet after something like what had just happened. Those were men who were thinking. And thinking men made decisions. The kind that came with consequences for everyone around them. The compound was outside the city limits. Khyven knew this because the lights thinned and then disappeared entirely, replaced by trees and a private road that did not show up on any navigation app he had ever used. The car stopped in front of a building that looked like a house but felt like a facility. Clean lines, no decorations, nothing that suggested anyone lived there so much as operated there. No visible guards. That was more unsettling than visible ones. He was guided inside by presence alone. Nobody touched him. Nobody had to. The interior was the same, white walls, low lighting, surfaces that reflected rather than absorbed. Every room felt like it had been designed specifically to remove hiding places. Not for him. For everyone. They sat him in a room with a single table and 3 chairs. And then the questions started. Soren went first. His approach was structured. Chronological. He wanted to know how long Khyven had been working the event, who had hired him, whether he had been there before, whether he knew anyone connected to the hotel's security team. The questions were calm. The pacing was precise. He was building a picture 1 pixel at a time. Khyven answered the easy ones. The rest he let sit. Vale went second. His approach was pressure. You're not scared enough, Vale said. Someone fired a weapon 10 feet from you, and you're sitting here like you're waiting for a bus. I'm sitting here because I don't have a choice, Khyven said. Everyone has a choice. Not when Nixer Valles closes his hand around your wrist. Vale leaned back. That answer landed somewhere. Khyven was not sure where. Nixer had not moved from the far corner of the room. He stood with his arms at his sides and his attention on Khyven in a way that went past observation and into something that felt cellular. Like he was not just watching Khyven but listening to him. Reading the parts of him that words did not reach. You notice things, Soren said. It was not a question. Everybody notices things, Khyven said. Not like that. Silence. Khyven looked at the table. I survived by paying attention, he said finally. That is all it is. He did not explain further. He had learned long ago that explaining yourself to people who were already suspicious did not make them less suspicious. It just gave them more material to work with. Sometimes survival is not about strength. It is about knowing when to stop talking. The 3 of them exchanged something. Not words. Not even looks exactly. Just a shift in the room. A recalibration. Soren leaned forward slightly. He's not lying, he said quietly. To his brothers, not to Khyven. The words were not loud, but they landed in the room like weight dropping. Khyven felt Nixer's eyes move over him. Slow, careful. Then Nixer spoke for the first time since the car. Then why do I feel like you knew more than you're saying? Khyven did not sleep. The room they put him in was clean and quiet and entirely without locks. That was the detail that kept him awake. Not the events of the night, not the gunshot still rattling around somewhere in the back of his skull. Not even the weight of Nixer's gaze that he could still feel like a hand on the back of his neck. The unlocked door. Because an unlocked door in a place like this was not freedom. It was a test. Or a trap. Or both. The kind of open road that led exactly where they wanted you to go. He sat on the edge of the bed and waited for morning. Came gray and quiet. Someone had left clothes outside the door, folded, precise, his size. He had not been asked his size. He had not given it. The fit was exact. That mattered. He ate what was brought to him. Said nothing about it. 2 hours into the morning, Soren found him in the main room. You want to leave, Soren said. I want to understand what I'm still doing here, Khyven said. Those are different things. Are they? Soren pulled a chair. Saturday. Crossed his ankle over his knee. You warned us, he said. That puts you in a position. I pointed something out. That is not the same as being part of whatever you are. It is when the people who fired that weapon now know your face. The room shifted. Khyven understood, suddenly, that the danger had not been last night. Last night was just the beginning of it. The real thing, the thing that followed, was everything that happened after. And because he had stepped into the frame, he was now in the frame. Fully. Without an exit. Vale came in from the left corridor. He moved differently than Soren. Less measured. He crossed the space quickly and dropped into the chair across from Khyven with the energy of someone who had already made up his mind about something and was now just running out the clock until he could say it. Here's what I don't get, Vale said. You're a stylist. Yes. You're not connected to anyone in our world. No. You had no reason to warn us. Correct. So why did you? Khyven looked at him. Because I could see what was going to happen. And that was enough for you to risk your life. He did not answer that one. Because the honest answer was that he had not thought about risk. Not in the moment. He had just seen the thing in the mirror and his mouth had moved. That was all. No calculation. No decision tree. Just an instinct that ran faster than thought and pulled the words out before anything else could stop them. Which scared him more than anything else about that night. Nixer came in last. He always did. Khyven was beginning to understand that this was not lateness. It was architecture. He arranged rooms before entering them. He stood at the far end of the table and looked at Khyven the way he always looked. Like a man reading a document that refused to resolve into a language he recognized. You keep saying you notice things, Nixer said. Yes. What did you notice in the mirror? A man adjusting his weapon. Security adjusts weapons. Not like that. Not at that angle. Not when their eyes are locked on a specific target. A beat. What else? His breathing was shallow. You can see it in the chest even from 20 feet. He was controlling it, too controlled. Someone who fires weapons for pay controls their breathing before the act. It is habit. The room was very still. Soren looked at his hands. Vale's jaw worked. Nixer did not move at all. You saw all of that, Soren said. Quiet. In about 4 seconds. Nobody spoke for a long time. Vale finally exhaled through his nose. He's either useful, he said, looking at his brothers. Then he looked at Khyven. Or a threat. The words sat in the air between them like a lit fuse. And Nixer, who had been still since he walked in, who had not shifted or blinked or given a single thing away, said the 7 words that closed every door Khyven had been quietly calculating. Either way. He doesn't leave. He tested it anyway. Not because he thought it would work, but because Khyven Rowe had never been the kind of person who accepted a wall without pressing his hands against it first, just to know exactly how solid it was. He walked the compound at 6 in the morning. No one stopped him. He found a side corridor that opened into a smaller courtyard. Stone, no camera he could see. A single gate that appeared to be on a timer. He stood at the edge of it for 40 seconds, watching the mechanism, calculating the window. He could have made it through. He was reasonably certain of that. Except Nixer was standing 10 feet behind him when he turned around. Not blocking. Not threatening. Just present. The way a wall is present. The way a cliff edge is present. You do not need a sign to understand that you are at the limit of something. The gate opens every 90 seconds, Nixer said. Closes in 4. You would have made it. Khyven looked at him. Then why didn't you stop me before I reached it? I wanted to see what you'd do. And you measured it, Nixer said. Twice. You ran the timing. Then you stopped. He said it without accusation, without satisfaction, like a man reading a result he had already hypothesized. You stopped, Nixer repeated. Why? Khyven did not have a clean answer. The truth was uncomfortable. He had stopped because something in his body had already done the math on the other side of that gate and found it lacking. Not because of the danger outside, that was real but manageable. He had survived tight situations before. Quiet exits, wrong neighborhoods, rooms where he was the only person without a weapon. He had stopped because something told him the information he needed was still inside this building. And he did not know where that information was, or what it was about, or why he wanted it. They spent the next 4 hours in a room that Soren used as a working space. Books, screens, organized chaos that looked random until you spent enough time in it to see the system underneath. Soren ran scenarios. Not interrogations this time. Tests. He would describe a room, layout, people, objects, and then change one detail and ask Khyven what shifted. He ran it 12 times. Khyven got 11 of them immediately and caught the 12th on the second pass. Soren did not say anything when Khyven got them right. He just moved to the next one, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Vale observed from the doorway. He had this thing he did, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed and his eyes half closed, where he looked like he was not paying attention. Khyven knew better. Vale was always paying the most attention. He just needed you to think otherwise. Around noon, Vale said. You knew it was wrong before you could explain why. Yes, Khyven said. That's happened before. It was not a question either. Khyven turned the pen he had been holding over in his fingers. Sometimes, he said. More than sometimes, Vale said. I can see it when you talk. You slow down before the answer because you're not retrieving a memory. You're following a signal back to its source. The room got quiet. Soren had stopped typing. Khyven set the pen down. Because Vale was right. And the thing about being right about something you did not ask to be right about was that it did not feel like a gift. It felt like a weight you had been carrying without knowing you were carrying it. He had always known things before he could explain them. Had always seen the piece that did not fit before anyone else had even looked at the puzzle. It had kept him alive. It had also made him invisible in a different way. The kind of invisible that comes from people not knowing what to do with you. The most dangerous thing is not being hunted. It is not knowing why you are valuable. Vale uncrossed his arms. He's either useful, he said, not for the first time. Pause. Or a threat. Then quieter. And with something underneath it that had not been there the night before. Either way, he doesn't leave. The room was not a cell. That was the part Khyven kept returning to as he moved through it. Touching the edge of the dresser, the back of the chair, the smooth face of the window that looked out over a small garden no one appeared to use. Not a cell. Too clean. Too deliberate. Too specifically arranged for a person who had not yet told anyone what he preferred. Clothes in his size. Food that matched, somehow, the things he actually ate. His schedule, or what remained of his schedule outside the compound, had been quietly reorganized around the movement patterns of the men who lived here. He had not asked for any of it. It had simply arrived. The way things arrive in places where someone has decided without asking what you need. He found Nixer in the main corridor mid-afternoon. Not by design. Nixer was simply there, standing in front of a wall of monitors that displayed feeds from every corner of the property. One hand in his pocket, the other tracing something on a screen with one finger. Slow, methodical. Khyven stopped, then kept walking. "You rearranged my schedule," he said. Nixer did not look up from the screen. "It needed adjusting. You didn't ask me. You weren't available to ask. I'm available now." Nixer's hand paused on the screen, then resumed its slow movement. "Your original schedule had you at 3 locations this week that are currently being watched," he said. Going to any of them would have been a problem. Khyven absorbed this. He knew it was true. He had no reason to doubt it. But the truth of it sat beside something else. The fact that the adjustment had been made before he had even been told about the risk. Before he had been given the chance to decide for himself. "You don't trust me," Khyven said. Nixer turned then, fully, and looked at him the way he always looked. Like the answer to the question was already somewhere in Khyven's face and he was just finding the page. "Trust is not the issue," Nixer said. "Then what is?" "I don't ignore anomalies." The word landed flat and clean. Anomaly, like a data point that does not fit the expected range. Not a person, a variable. Khyven kept his voice level. "I'm not an anomaly." Something moved in Nixer's expression. Not a smile. Nothing that soft. But a shift. The kind you get when a piece of information arrives that you had already calculated for and it arrives anyway. He stepped closer. 1 step. Measured. The gap between them was still appropriate. Still controlled. But the quality of the distance had changed. It was no longer the distance of assessment. It was the distance of something that had made a decision it had not yet announced. "Then explain," Nixer said, voice dropping to the register it always found when he was being most precise. "Why you feel like one." Khyven opened his mouth, and had no answer, because the honest truth, the thing that sat at the bottom of every interaction he had had in this building, the thing that hummed beneath the surface of the tests and the questions and the unlocked doors, was that he could not explain it. He could not explain why he had known. He could not explain why it kept happening. He could not explain why, standing in this corridor with a man who had essentially claimed him without using the word, he felt something closer to recognition than fear. And Nixer, watching him not answer, nodded once. Like that was the response he had expected. Like the silence itself confirmed something. The alert came at 3:47 in the morning. Not an alarm. Not a siren. Just a single light on the monitor wall switching from green to red, and Soren already standing in front of it by the time anyone else reached the room. He had been awake. Khyven noticed that. He had been awake and positioned, which meant some part of him had already expected something to move tonight. The safe route had been compromised. That was the clean version of it. The actual version was that a convoy, 3 vehicles pre-cleared, running a protocol that only 6 people inside this compound were supposed to know about, had been stopped at a checkpoint that should not have existed. The driver had diverted. The cargo had been delayed. And the checkpoint had vanished before anyone could verify it. Someone had fed it. The information, the route, the timing, all of it, from inside. The room filled in stages. Vale came in fast, already dressed, reading the feed over Soren's shoulder. 2 of the compound's security heads entered behind him and stood near the door. Nixer arrived last. Unhurried, face unreadable, eyes going directly to the map pulled up on the center screen. Khyven stood at the edge of the room. He had not been summoned. He had heard the door and followed the sound the way he always followed things that moved wrong in a quiet space. Old habit. The kind that had kept him out of situations he never saw coming until they were already over. He looked at the map. The compromised route ran east to west through 3 intersections and a covered bridge overpass. Simple. Clean. The kind of path you used specifically because it had no variables. Except. He crossed the room without asking permission. Soren tracked him but did not move. Khyven pointed at the second intersection. The timing here is off, he said. Soren pulled the data. The convoy had passed through the first checkpoint at 9 minutes past the hour. The second was logged at 17 minutes past. The distance between them, at the speed they were traveling, should have put them there at 13 minutes. For minutes unaccounted for. Not a mechanical issue. Not traffic. A stop. A controlled, deliberate 4-minute stop that had not been logged because whoever made it happen did not want it logged. They weren't just fed the route, Khyven said. He traced the line with one finger, not touching the screen. They were fed the gap. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true enters them. Soren's hands moved across the keyboard. Data pulled. Cross-referenced. Timestamps compared against internal communication logs. Vale's jaw was tight. The 2 security heads exchanged something. Nixer had not moved from where he stood. Someone inside is feeding them, Soren said quietly. Not loud. Not dramatic. The way you say a thing when you have just finished proving it and the proof is worse than the question that started it. Khyven stepped back from the screen. He was already running the next piece. Thinking backward through the chain. Who knew the route, who had access to the timing, who had been in proximity to the communication window when the information would have had to leave the building. The list was not long. That was the problem. It was never long when the answer was inside your own walls. Power does not come from being the strongest person in the room. It comes from being right when everyone around you is still asking questions. Nixer finally moved. He walked to the center of the room. Stopped beside the screen. Looked at the route. Then looked at Khyven. Not the security heads. Not Soren. Not Vale. Khyven. And somehow, Nixer said, voice low and even and carrying the particular weight of a man who did not spend words unless they were necessary, you're ahead of it. The records came back clean. That was the first problem. Too clean. The kind of clean that takes effort to produce. Khyven Rowe. Full name, 2 middle initials that matched no birth record. Soren could pull, employment history running back 7 years through 4 cities. Showed up exactly as he should. No gaps large enough to flag. No connections that reached the wrong people. No digital footprint that suggested anything beyond what he had always said he was. A stylist. A person who noticed things. Someone with good instincts and fast eyes and a habit of being in the wrong place at the right time. Except, the first relocation did not match the timeline. Soren found it at 6 in the morning, 2 days after the route compromise, buried in a housing record from a city Khyven had never mentioned. He had been registered at an address there for 11 months. Then the record stopped. Not closed. Not forwarded. Not updated. Just stopped. Like a file that someone had decided to leave open. Then a new file started somewhere else 18 months later. 18 months with nothing. No employment. No address. No medical. No transactions. Soren showed it to Nixer without comment. Nixer looked at it for a long time. Then he called Khyven in. He did not lead with the records. That was Nixer's way. He gave you enough rope to walk freely before you realized where the boundary was. He asked about the first city first. Khyven answered without hesitation. Then Nixer said, "You were there 11 months. Yes. Then you left. Yes. Where did you go?" A pause. Not the kind that comes from lying. The kind that comes from reaching for something and not finding it exactly where you expect it. "I don't." Khyven stopped. Tried again. "I moved. I needed to move." "Why?" "I felt like I had to." Nixer leaned forward slightly. "Felt." "Yes." "Not decided. Not planned." "Felt." Khyven looked at the table. He had not thought about that period in a long time. It had always been easier not to. The feeling that had made him leave, that pressing, urgent, sourceless certainty, had been so complete that he had packed in one night and driven until the feeling quieted. He had never tried to explain it because he had never had anyone to explain it to. I remember fragments, he said, quietly, almost to himself. Soren, sitting at the corner of the room, did not type, did not move. What kind of fragments? Nixer said. Khyven pressed his fingers flat on the table. A room, he said. White, lights that never changed. Voices. Not talking to me, talking about me. Running numbers. Checking responses. He paused. Patterns. The same patterns over and over. Like something being drilled in. Silence. Were you trained? Vale said. He had come in at some point. Khyven had not noticed. He stood near the door with his arms at his sides. Not crossed, not loose. Just there. Like someone who had decided to take this seriously. I don't know, Khyven said. You don't know, Vale repeated. I don't know who did it or why. I don't know how long. I just know that some of what I can do, the noticing, the speed of it, I didn't always have it. Or I didn't always feel it this clearly. He exhaled slowly. I thought it was just me. He looked up. What if it's not just me? Nobody answered. Because the answer to that question, the real one, the one that sat underneath all the others, was the kind that changed the shape of everything around it. Vale's expression had shifted. Slightly. Something had moved behind his eyes. Not suspicion, not calculation. Something more cautious than that. More careful. He was the last person Khyven had expected softness from. The first person to show it. Nixer stood. Slow. He came around the table and stopped at the edge of it. Arms at his sides. Jaw set. Then we find out, he said. Who tried to turn you into a weapon. He made it to the east gate this time. Further than the courtyard. Further than any of the previous attempts he had not quite admitted to himself were attempts. He had a bag. He had a route mapped in his head that did not rely on the compound's layout, but on what he had observed through windows and from rooftops and in the geometry of patrol patterns he had been logging without meaning to. He made it to the gate. He had the timing right. He had 12 seconds. And then the perimeter lit up. Not lights. Not alarms. 3 figures moving from positions that should not have been visible from his angle, appearing at exactly the 3 points that cut off every viable direction at once. Fast. Coordinated. Like they had run this scenario before. Like they had been waiting for it. He stopped. The bag hung at his side. He did not run. Running was pointless and he knew it, and he had too much self-respect to do something pointless in front of people who were already watching him like he was a problem they had decided to solve. Nixer was not one of the 3 figures. He was behind Khyven. Close enough that Khyven heard him before he saw him. Not footsteps, but a shift in the air. The particular quality of presence that Nixer carried everywhere. The kind that took up space without announcing itself. You planned this one, Nixer said. Yes. You were better prepared than last time. Yes. And you still didn't make it. Khyven turned around. Nixer stood 10 feet back, jacket open, hands at his sides. His face was the same face it always was. Still read nothing, give nothing. But there was something underneath it tonight. Something that had been there since the conversation about the fragments and the white room and the voices talking about him like he was data on a table. Something that was not quite anger. Closer to urgency. They hit the east corridor 6 minutes ago, Nixer said. It took Khyven a second. What? Someone targeted the specific corridor your movement pattern would have taken you through. His voice did not rise. The attack was not random. It was timed to your exit. The ground did not move beneath Khyven's feet. But something shifted in the same way ground shifts, not visible, not loud, just suddenly different. They tracked me, he said. They tracked your movement pattern, which means they have been watching long enough to know how you think. Nixer paused. Which means leaving this compound does not take you away from danger. It delivers you to it. Khyven set the bag down. It made a quiet sound against the stone. You're not protecting me, he said. You're protecting what you've decided is yours. He said it without heat. Just the truth of it sitting in the air between them. Nixer looked at him for a long time. Then he crossed the distance. Not fast, not slow, exactly as deliberate as everything else he did, and stopped 3 feet away. You don't walk away from us, he said. Not loud. Not threatening. Final. The kind of sentence that does not leave room for a counter because it is not an argument. It is a fact that has already decided to be true. Khyven felt the weight of it land somewhere he could not name. I didn't ask for this, he said. Quiet. Almost a whisper. He meant the compound and the watchers and the people outside who knew his movement patterns and the fragments in his memory and all of it. The entire shape of the situation he had walked into with a bag and a tie in 40 minutes' notice. Nixer did not move. He looked at Khyven the way he looked at things he had already accepted and was simply waiting for the other person to catch up to. You don't have to ask, he said. For something that already chose you. The file had a name on it. Not Khyven's. An organization name, 4 letters, no punctuation, the kind of label that appears in classified documents specifically because it sounds like nothing. Like an accounting firm. Like a logistics company. Like something too boring to look at twice. Soren had found it buried in a network thread attached to the original assassination order. Not the one from the hotel. The one before that. The one that had been designed to fail. That was the piece that changed everything. Pause on that. The assassination attempt outside the hotel had not been a real attempt. It had been a mechanism. A controlled event built to produce one specific outcome. Khyven Rowe, last-minute replacement stylist, close enough to Nixer Valles to issue a warning that could not be ignored. Close enough to be kept. Soren laid it out on the table without dramatics. 3 documents. 1 communication thread. A timestamp that proved the order had been given 11 days before the hotel event, while Khyven was still working a different assignment in a different part of the city and had no reason to be anywhere near these men. The insertion had been planned. Khyven had been placed. He sat with that for a full minute before he spoke. I was supposed to warn you, he said. Yes, Soren said. And then you were supposed to keep me. Yes. So I could be used. Soren looked at him. That was the calculation, he said carefully. By whoever designed it. The idea being that proximity to us would make you a liability or a tool, depending on which direction they pushed. He paused. What they did not account for was that the situation would stop being theirs the moment you made a choice they did not script. Khyven looked at the documents. He was looking for the moment. The exact place in the chain where he had done something outside the outline. Where his decision, real, unscripted, entirely his own, had broken the model. He found it. The gate. The first morning. The courtyard. When he had stood at the edge of it, measured the timing and turned around. Not because he was stopped. Because he had decided the information he needed was still inside. That decision had not been part of anyone's plan. Control fails the moment choice enters the equation. That is not a lesson, it is just what happens. Every time. They wanted you to keep me close, Khyven said. Soren nodded. Because close to you, I would be useful to them. Yes. Khyven looked at the 4-letter name on the document. He thought about the White Room. The voices. The patterns drilled in so deep they felt like instinct. He thought about the 11 months in a city he barely remembered, the gap of 18 months that had nothing in it, the relocation that he had felt rather than decided. He thought about a version of himself that had been built. Carefully, quietly, with significant resources, to be an asset inside an operation that was not supposed to know it was using him. He thought about how none of that had worked, because he had turned around at a gate, because he had stayed when it made no calculated sense to stay, because at some point, he could not name the exact moment but it had happened. He had stopped being a piece in someone else's game and started being exactly where he chose to be. He picked up the document, looked at the name. then looked at Nixer, who had been standing at the far wall in silence since the briefing started, watching, as always, for the thing beneath the thing. "They wanted us to keep you close," Soren said, and Nixer looked at Khyven. "Steady. Waiting." Khyven set the document down. "Then let's make that their worst mistake." The threat was still out there. That was the honest version of where things stood. No one in the room said it plainly, but it sat in the air of the compound the same way cold sits in a room after a window has been open. Even after you close it, the temperature takes time to recover. The organization, 4 letters, no face, no address that matched anything verifiable, had been exposed. Soren's work, mostly. Threads pulled from 12 different sources and laid side by side until the pattern became undeniable. They knew what it was now. They knew its shape. But knowing the shape of something and dismantling it were 2 different problems. And that was fine. For now. Khyven understood, somewhere in the days that had followed the briefing, that the resolution he had been expecting, the clean break, the clear exit, the moment when the threat was definitively over and he could return to a version of ordinary, was not coming. Not immediately. Maybe not for a long time. He had stopped looking for it. He was in the main room when Nixer found him. Not unusual. Most things in this building happened in the main room eventually. It had the monitors, the table, the infrastructure that kept the whole operation from having to be wherever Nixer happened to be standing. It was the center of the compound the way the sun is the center of a system. Not because it announced itself, but because everything else arranged itself around it. Khyven was standing near the window, looking at the garden that no one used. He heard Nixer before he saw him. That quality of presence again, the particular weight of it, the way the air in a room changed when he entered. Not everyone did that. Most people moved through space. Nixer occupied it. He stopped beside Khyven, looked at the same garden. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Nixer reached over. Slow, deliberate. He adjusted Khyven's collar. Not the tie, Khyven was not wearing one. Just the collar. One side had folded slightly, an imperfection that Khyven had not noticed and Nixer had apparently decided required correction. His fingers were precise, quick, then still. Khyven looked at him. Nixer looked back. And there it was, the reversal of the moment that had started all of this. The hands, the proximity, the stillness that followed. Except this time, the roles had shifted in a way that could not be undone and both of them understood it completely without saying so. Equal, Khyven said. Not a question. Nixer said nothing, which was its own answer. Because equal in this world, their world, the one Khyven had stepped into with 40 minutes notice and a borrowed stylus bag, did not mean free. It never would. It meant standing beside rather than behind, meant being accounted for rather than managed, meant your name being in the calculation rather than underneath it. It meant chosen, not captured. Sometimes survival changes you. You go in one thing and come out another and you do not always get to pick what the change looks like. But sometimes, not always, not often, what changes is not what you thought it would be. Sometimes the thing that changes is the version of yourself you had always accepted as permanent. Sometimes what survives is who you were always supposed to become. The garden outside was still. The compound was quiet. Nixer's hand dropped from Khyven's collar. And across the city, in an office that did not appear on any map, a man sat in front of a screen showing a live feed of the compound's exterior. He watched the light on in the main room. He watched the 2 figures at the window. He did not look concerned. He looked satisfied. He set down his coffee, pulled a file from the stack on his desk, opened it to a page marked with a single tab. Phase 2, he said, to no one, to everyone who was listening, begins now that he trusts them. And that is where we leave it. Khyven walked in as nobody. He walked out as something none of them had a word for yet. The threat was not finished. The organization was not gone. And the man across the city had just confirmed what everyone watching had already started to feel. This story is far from over. If this one hit different, if you felt every chapter, if you stayed all the way to the end, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. Every week, stories land on this channel that do not go gentle. Stories with stakes, with heat, with characters that stay with you after the screen goes dark. You do not want to walk in halfway through. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Who did you trust in this story? Who surprised you? And what do you think Phase 2 looks like? Your perspective matters here. Share it. Someone else reading your comment might find exactly what they needed today.